Hello, Vaughn.
Hello, Harold.
Well, it may be December, but things are not slowing down over in your part of the world there. The premier, plenty to talk about on the reconciliation front, UNDRIP. I don't know. Where do you want to start unpacking all of that?
Well, a pretty shocking speech by the Premier this week to the Chamber of Commerce in Vancouver. You know, he is a lawyer. Was the Attorney General, and he says he has respect for the courts, but he didn't show a hell of a lot of it in that speech. He basically accused the courts of having endangered the reconciliation agenda with Indigenous nations here in BC and the economic growth of the province as well. Very strong language, referring to two court cases that we've covered in some depth and which are huge. And the first one is the one back in August, where a court, BC Supreme Court, awarded Aboriginal title to the Cowichan tribes over a sizable piece of land in Richmond that included public as well as private land. And the Premier says that's an assault on private property. And he says the government is going to go to the wall to defend private property. And he made news. He said that, told the Chamber of Commerce that the government is looking at providing some sort of financial guarantees to the private landowners in that area. So homeowners and business landowners. He says that, well, I guess the government's researched it and concluded those people may have trouble renewing their mortgages or selling their property. So the government is going to come in and back them up with some sort of financial indemnity going forward. So that's one of the cases. And the other one is a case that came down just last week. BC Court of Appeal ruled that the province's mineral claims filing regime, so the law that you want to file a mineral claim, that's incompatible with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which the province has a law on that. And EB says the court completely misread the government's intentions. We do have a law that says we are going to work with First Nations to amend BC's laws over time to reconcile them with the principles of the UN Declaration. But he says this is going to be worked out between the province and Indigenous nations, and it's going to take time. It's not a job for the courts to come along and just overthrow the law on the spot. So he says the province is going to have to amend the legislation, and it will do that in the new year. But again, you've got a premier that's very critical of the courts, and clearly, Harold, I'm sure the government's own opinion polling has told them that there's a growing problem with the BC public on this issue because of the perception that people's private homes and private land is on the table for the first time.
We also heard this week from 16 mayors in Metro Vancouver, the mayors of the largest municipalities, with the exception of the city of Vancouver, all asking for the government to back off on housing policy, housing legislation.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, David Eby, as premier, very early on in his time as premier, brings in legislation that effectively gives, with the province taking control of local zoning for housing, the end of single-family neighborhoods, the end of public hearings on major projects, and mandates to begin approving high rises, multi-unit complexes, greater density. And they dumped all that on the municipalities. And the municipalities, I would say, grudgingly have tried to work with it. And some of them worked with it better than others. But you're right. Now we have 16 mayors coming out and saying, we can't work with this. You've given us a whole bunch of problems, and you've not helped us with the fallout. So one of the biggest fallouts is if you're going to increase the density in a community and improve high rises and more housing and bigger housing projects, you got to look at infrastructure. You're going to have to upgrade the sewers, parking issues, traffic, all sorts of things. You're going to have to build community centers. You're going to have schools. And the mayors are saying that support just isn't there. Your one size fits all zoning doesn't suit us. And I was struck by the fact that the mayor who spoke the most on this was Mike Hurley, the mayor of Burnaby. He's a New Democrat. And Burnaby is a community that elects, reliably elects 4 New Democrats to the legislature every time there's an election. So, these mayors, and next year is civic election year. It's no mystery what these mayors are doing. They're getting ready to go to their own voters and say, we've had huge problems dumped in our lap by the province and they aren't helping us. So
they all have budgets they have to approve for next year too. And they're staring at some infrastructure bills and that they're a little alarmed by. Now that the municipal affairs minister, Christine Boyle, herself a former city councillor in Vancouver, sees no reason to change the current policies and says there's $1 billion fund out there for them to access for infrastructure. So what's the concern?
I was surprised that her answer was so unsympathetic to the mayors and councillors. That we're not backing off. We're not going back. Look, Christine Boyle is not just a former member of Vancouver City Council. She got the NDP nomination to run in the last election with the full support and endorsement of the Premier's wife. She's the Premier's wife's best friend. She is the godmother, godparent to the Premier's son. This is the best connected minister in government. If she says we're not backing off, and if she sounds unsympathetic to the mayors, she's speaking for the Premier. So I'm surprised that the government isn't more conciliatory on this, because these mayors go right across the political spectrum, right? And I say they're facing re-election next year. So I think the government is going to have to step up and accommodate some of these concerns. I don't think they can be as aggressive as they were in their initial response this week.
All right. Finally, the Conservatives. Of course, we talked last week about the disappearance of Rusted. Trevor Halford in there as the interim leader. But what's next? Are you hearing any names as potential leaders?
Well, I every time you think the government's problems have no end, this comes along, and the New Democrats are going, well, at least we're not the Conservatives. So let's see. Halford is the new leader. Rusted quit. And Halford, I see, went off to Ottawa and made up with Pierre Poilievre right away. So get that going. We've got the 2 things going on. The Conservative Party itself, the leaders of the party, the board, is deciding what kind of a leadership race they will have, what the rules will be. And at the moment, I'm hearing the consensus is the race will start in January and run about 3 months. They don't want to go on too long. They're a little worried that EB might try to call a snap election on them. But they would like to get more members in the party, and there'll be some restrictions on financing and so forth. The second thing is you're starting to hear candidates come forward and say they're looking at it or there's speculation about it. So Aaron Gunn, federal MP, just elected in the spring, one of the people that was involved in building up the BC Conservative Party, he says he's looking at it. We've had some people take themselves out and say they're not looking at it. Ellis Ross, federal MP, is one of them. Eleanor Sturko, independent, former Conservative MLA. Caroline Elliott, resident of the North Shore, she's been writing stuff on the Indigenous issue, and she's now started posting commentaries on YouTube with her stand on various political issues. So she's thinking of it. She
And
is
sorry,
Kevin
she's the
Falcon's sister-in-law, but
right.
I wouldn't
Yes.
hold that against her, I guess is what I would say. Let's see who else. Harman Bangu, MLA, Langley. Gavin Dew, some speculation on him, although I gather he's been telling some people he's not thinking of doing it. He's from Kelowna, so they could have a pretty good field of candidates. The question is, uh, what do we know? And the answer is not very much about the 6,500 members of the Conservatives. Rustad said he'd like to see the party take 8 months and try to get that membership up, so there'd be greater diversity in the membership. But I think the party is worried if they take too long, as I said, EB may ambush them with a snap election. So, I've said the Conservatives could do worse than Rustad. I've met some of the people that would be worse than Rustad. So I don't know how it's going to go, but we could be into a fairly lively leadership race in the new year. And I was on looking at some stuff from Angus Reid's polling organization the other day. And he's got, even with all Rustad's leadership troubles, he's got the Conservatives and the NDP in pretty much a dead heat. EB's popular, and yes, Rustad was unpopular, but if you ask people if the election were held tomorrow, who would you vote for? It's pretty much a dead heat, which is where things stood a year ago. So if the Conservatives can pick a leader who's plausible, speaks well, they could be in a very competitive position with the government very quickly.
6,500 members. That seems low, but I mean, it is low. How many members would the NDP have, or just roughly do you figure?
I would think in the tens of thousands.
Yes.
And the old Liberal Party, Social Credit Party, they would have been in the tens of thousands. But the Conservatives are a brand new political party, right? For years they were just a little club of people that kept the label alive and didn't win anything in elections. And then suddenly BC United collapses and shuts itself down, sort of commits suicide, and suddenly the Conservatives are the party of choice. The brand is popular. A bunch of people joined last year. I think at one point they were up to around 8,000 members, but it's not a huge membership. And again, a lot of people. There may be Conservatives who think that Dallas Brody, who won BC, would be the best leader of them, and then go all the way across the political spectrum to thinking that Eleanor Sturko would be the best leader for them, and everybody in between. So they're an undefined, unknown quantity, I think, even for some members of the Conservative Party.
Well, that's great. You've given us lots to think about and watch for in January. Thanks, Vaughn.